This episode is for Friday, July 29th, 2016. Welcome, Crater fans. I'm your host, Josh Owens, along with my co-host.
Abby Iyer.
Hey, Abby, how's it going?
Pretty good, man. Some crazy stuff happened to me over the weekend. I came back out to the desert, so I have my new change of scenery. It turns out my girlfriend got a call on Friday that she got into medical school.
Oh,
So we had to
nice.
pack her stuff up, and she actually left today for school on Wednesday. So it's that short of a time period that everything had to get ready and stuff. So it's a little mini vacation, but it's not a fun vacation, that's for sure.
Nice. Yeah, I spent some time playing with ESLint. Do you guys use ESLint?
Yeah, very, very heavily.
Yeah, I feel a blog post coming, or actually, probably it'll be a code kata, I think. Maybe in a
Yeah, I
couple.
think I think if you're not using ESLint right now, you should. It's just
Yeah.
such a good way to keep everything in style.
Yeah, agreed. And like the impetus for me to start playing around with it was like I'm on a project that is using ESLint, but it wasn't specified everywhere in the package.json. And so like it turns out that you can have a globally installed ESLint or a locally installed ESLint, and like that wasn't super awesome. And so I was trying to rectify all that, and then it turns out like it's just kind of slow. So when I was saving a file in Vim,
Yeah,
it would take a minute to pop. And so I ended up finding this package called eslint_d, and it basically runs an eslint
never heard of that.
daemon, and
Yeah.
it'll determine whether you have a local version installed or not, and then use the global if it needs to. So that's kind of nice because then I can like per project you can have that in your package.json dev dependencies, and it'll pick it up and everything will get installed and run correctly. And then after the first time you save and it runs the ESLint, after that it's like super fast.
Yeah, I didn't even know about that. We ran into those problems. We ran into those problems a lot when we upgraded ESLint versions, and some people running ESLint locally, like by themselves, typing ESLint dot or whatever.
Yeah.
They would be getting like different different error messages based on the version because syntax changes quite a bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, it would be nice to have something like that.
Yeah, totally. And it's easy to use. Like so if you use Atom, ESLint D is not a big deal for most people, I think.
Yeah.
They've already got a speedy setup, but for Vim, this is definitely helpful. And then on top of that, like, when you want to use the Airbnb standard or something like that,
Mm-hmm. That's what
um,
we use.
it's like you got to install like four, like I think there's like 8 dependencies or something that you have to get to go along with it, and like
Yeah.
to use that as a globally done thing, you have to like install all those globally as well, which is it's just terrible. Like I'd rather just specify that stuff in the package JSON and not worry about mucking up all this global stuff.
Yeah, it gets a little hairier when you're trying to do like complicated ESLint stuff. Like we just implemented ESLint import styling, so making sure that all our imports are at the top of the file and there's space between them, and then they resolve the correct places and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And we also do ESLint for flow types, so flow type checker to make sure all the syntax is right for your annotations and stuff.
Yeah.
Overall, it's great. I remember before ESLint, I would have to like go and bug people during pull requests to add commas and do all that stuff. And
Hmm.
now the tooling just does it for you, so that's good. It's
Yeah.
easier to command people via tooling than just talking to them.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So let's get on with the show. Sorry, I'm being bombarded with Slack chat messages. So this week we are talking about React 15.3. Going to talk about CPUGate, aka Meteor 1.4, coming out.
Uh,
Jest 14 got launched, and someone dropped the CSS and the JavaScript, and that's a problem. we can talk.
Great, let's do it.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, first up, like we were just talking about this before the show too. Like I haven't used pure component yet, but that's the big thing for React 15.3 came out actually on the 29th. And they've added a new class, React.pure component, that replaces the React add-on pure render mixin. And like I
Yep.
said, because I came in at a time where, mixins were kind of dying off. I never really I haven't gotten to the point where I've had to create a pure component. And you're saying like you guys don't even use pure components, right?
No.
Yeah, but it's the idea that it should, like, using a pure component means that the it'll only re-render when the props change.
Yeah. And
Which
state.
I think for the most part, like I trend towards maybe a stateless functional component for that kind of stuff myself. But I think the pure component can take you a little bit further than that, I guess.
Yeah. There's like so many. I guess like with what Pure Render Mixin did and what Pure Component does, is it implements like should component update under the hood, and it makes sure it just does it for you instead of you having to do it all the time. The only thing though is that's a huge burden on your application. If you have a huge component tree and you're doing like a should component update at the top level of the tree, you can get yourself into a lot of weird issues where they don't like the components in that tree don't update because the top level component has not allowed for updating. So my recommendation is, one, you only need it when you need it. You don't need to do it every single time. If you think of your app in stateless functional components, you can make smaller component trees, and then you can maybe do like a pure render, like higher order component or something if you want,
Yeah.
But use it when you need it. That's what we do. We haven't run into any problems. I remember the first time I actually used should component update in pure render mixin was I had to do an autosave component where the top level component is constantly autosaving, calling some method. And after it calls the method, it changes the state to say, like, I'm not going to call this method until the user interacts with the screen again. What that was doing was it was causing a huge amount of updates downstream because it's like the top level container, and I have a whole page inside of it.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to do some should component update trickery there to make sure that it only changed when the prop changed, not when state changes. Yeah. So that was, so you only need it when you need it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some other interesting stuff in here too. They've added some new warnings and improved some warnings, so it looks like they're kind of gearing up for version 16 to come out at some point, and likely those warnings are in there to kind of hopefully get you to fix things before then. And I didn't even realize, like, I was looking through this changelog. They have the React Perf add-on. They fixed an issue with warnings, but I'd never actually used the React Perf add-on, had never looked at it, and this is actually pretty awesome looking. So
yeah,
like I would recommend reading changelogs. You can learn things for sure. But this thing's awesome because you can install it and call perf start and perf stop, and then like look at the measurements in there. And then we're not talking like flame graphs are interesting and useful for certain things, but this is showing you how many instances of things and like how long it took to render it and that kind of thing. So
it's if you want to get into like the nitty gritty of your render performance, and like that's the best place to do it.
Yeah. I wish something like this was around when we were dealing with the problems with Crater. Like there's still like major rendering problems, which is something like Sasha and I are going to be working on this week, is getting the React version of a theme up for Crater. So hopefully we can get Nova. But
the one thing I'll say about React in general is they're really good about the warnings. Like every release, there's always some new warning because they are themselves in the process of switching their code base over into ES6, and they're using code mods to actually do sweeping changes, and they make mistakes too. And it's funny that like they're making drastic changes, yet they're keeping things somewhat backwards compatible. in a sense, and there's everything's just a warning, like if you're doing something wrong, warning. If you're using something deprecated, warning.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the way it should be, right? Like coming from
Yeah, it should be.
Railsland, this was a thing that just happened, right? Like you would install a new version and like it would warn you, and the warning would let you know like in the next major release, this feature is going to be gone. It's deprecated, right? Like don't use it, change it, use the new syntax, that kind of thing. And like that that's the one thing I feel like for me in Meteorland has been missing, and I would agree with you. Like React has done an amazing job at that kind of thing. So
Yeah,
kudos to them.
definitely.
Yeah, this is now we're getting into Meteor. Um, like they strive really really hard to make sure they have backwards compatibility, and they don't really like deprecate a whole lot of things. Have you noticed that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they don't.
So tell us about 1.4, Hobby.
Okay. So last week, Meteor 1.4 was released, and we call it CPUGate. We'll get into that in a second. But 1.4 is actually a pretty interesting release for people who have been using Meteor for a while. For the longest time, Meteor was on using like Node version 0.10 dot whatever, and that is really old, really old. Some NPM packages don't even support that version anymore. If you're doing some higher computational stuff with those NPM modules, they won't even support 0.10. Probably the minimum is like maybe Node 4 or even Node 6 for some packages. So Meteor upgraded the Node version to Node 4.47, which is a long-running stable version. I was kind of hoping for Node 6 just to keep it on the edge, but it's all cool. Node 4 is great. And then they also updated the Mongo driver for 3.2.6.
Right.
And that's also good because our Mongo driver in Meteor today is actually super outdated.
Oh yeah,
Really old.
it's really old. And like
Really
the shipped version of Mongo that comes when you install Meteor, like the binary version, because they use their own
Yeah.
install when you run it on your dev machine, was 2.6, and now they ship with 3.2. And by default, they're creating on your local machine WireTiger databases now,
Yeah.
rather than the old one. So, and if you want to take advantage of that, you can do a Meteor reset. It'll clear out your DB and set it for WireTiger.
Yeah. And then with WireTiger, like most of the database providers provide that WireTiger support for 3.2. I believe Compose does for 3.2, but not 3.0. Maybe Mongo Labs and stuff do. So I'm sure anyone hosting their database right now will be fine. You should expect a performance boost with Mongo 3.2. There's a lot of cool things in Mongo 3.2 like document validation, and that's like gets rid of simple schema essentially for using Mongo. So that's cool. And the cool thing about the Mongo upgrade is it was just a huge effort from an open source contributor
It was.
he was just between jobs and he just decided to work on this. So I think his name is Fabs. Fabs is his name on GitHub. Fabrico de Souza Nascimento. He's from Brazil actually, and it's cool. So he did this whole effort, and that's great. Another really core part of this release was unpinning the packaged versions.
Mm-hmm.
So like in Meteor 1.3 and before, like Blaze, for instance, would be at a pinned version of like 2.1 or something. And now that they unpin these versions, they can start releasing new versions of Blaze or accounts or whatever, without having to push a Meteor 1.4.1 or whatever like that. Like in 1.3, there was a lot of problems with compiling node modules that were like actual C++ modules. And for us, they pushed a fix called like 1.3.2.5-workpop. They did that. And then they got into like the 1.3.25 main release. And then what what all those batch releases had to be done just so they could fix these small issues in maybe the ECMAScript package, or the promise package, Meteor promise and stuff like that, whatever. It's great to know that now they can start moving like incremental parts independently without having to affect the full release. So that's cool. So let's get into why it's called CPUGate. Unfortunately, I've complained about this many times, and they're not doing anything to fix it. I think they're spiting me, I guess. But the CPU, when you're running Meteor 1.4, your CPU spikes at 100% on your computer, like literally. Like it is. The reload times are even slower for big apps. Your computer is pushing, like your computer is about to take off. Essentially, like the fan is running like a beast, and it's about to take off to outer space. Like that's how much force it's trying to use, and it's actually like I think it's causing a bunch of CPU spikes on actual production servers. I'm not sure the story about that. That's what I was hearing from other people's horror stories. That one, like they can't even get their app running via something's changed about like how they load in the lib folder, which I need to verify if that's true or not. There's a gentleman who, before in Meteor 1.2, you could just dump in like JavaScript files into lib, like vendor files, like jQuery or something, if you wanted to put something in there. And that wasn't working for someone. Yeah. So what did you hear about CPUGate?
Yeah, so I guess the thing I saw was that Meteor 1.4, like the tool downloaded into the background, and it would update and auto symlink, and so you would run the Meteor 1.4 tooling even though you're using Meteor 1.3, and apparently had something to do with the way like it would run in Node 4 land. But then try to springboard into its own like 0.10 version if you're running an older version. And so something would happen before that springboard would finish, and it would cause the CPU to spike up and just stay there. And so they have fixed it. In the 1.4.0.1, which I mean, it's to be expected. This crap always happens when a new release comes out. This is not specific to Meteor. This is not specific. This is like an open source thing.
Yeah, this happens every
release. Like honestly, I'm surprised we haven't seen 15.3.1. Like maybe their release process has just been that good with React.
Yeah.
I don't know. But it's just to be expected, in my opinion. And it looks like there were some people hard at work on it and trying to figure it out, and the community rallied around pretty well, and they were able to kind of figure that out. But and maybe this is a slight annoyance that people didn't realize was happening, is like it's auto updating in the background. I'm fine if the tool tells me, hey, there's a new version available, but I don't necessarily like that it's auto downloading and updating the tool without my knowledge.
So yeah, on our end, when we had these like build tool problems, we were just looking forward to the build tool upgrading without us having to upgrade our Meteor version, because for us that goes through a huge cycle of review and work that goes into upgrading Meteor, because we have to pretty much test a bunch of stuff. So like when we got the new build tool, that means because we were compiling like Google Cloud, the package, we were compiling it on every change just because there was a bug in the compilation project. So it was even slower, which is probably why I was cranky a couple of weeks ago. So every time I was compiling Google Cloud. So when 1.3.5's tool came out, we didn't have to do that anymore, and it was great. But we were still at 1.3.2.1. It's getting annoying saying these numbers, but and then now with 1.4, where we're hitting those CPU increases, and we need to diagnose that. But at the end of the day, this release is good for the core of Meteor, but nothing has changed about product development experience, and that's mainly like the build tool, just the build tool. Everything else has changed though.
I almost worry at this point. Like I think I'm pretty sure I've seen problems with deploying with Meteor up with 1.4.
Yeah, that's what I've been reading.
And it looks like this is bringing into question, like, Meteor up hasn't been, doesn't look like it's being actively developed at this point. And we're in
Yeah,
this state where you've got MUP, you've got MUPX, and you've got like MUP2, which looks interesting, but it's not fully baked yet either. So, like, it begs the question of, like, is Kadira going to keep doing this, or are they not? Like, we're hearing now that maybe they're using Galaxy, so why would they support this? So, it
yeah,
may take a community effort to get some of this stuff fixed and working, uh,
yeah,
which is interesting. But I'll say, like, as far as, like, I anticipated this being a terrible upgrade. I installed it on my client project and it just worked. Like, I didn't,
okay,
there was nothing there that I had to do, which was maybe a little surprising to me, right? Because the 1.3 upgrade, well, you install it and it just worked. Switching to the import syntax and that kind of stuff was a little painful. But now, like, 1.4 required no effort on my part for this client app so far, and I'm almost done with spacedojo.com, like migrating
nice.
it to React and Meteor. I was working on it this weekend, and once I get it done and deployed, I'm going to play with 1.4 as well and see how that goes. um,
Yeah,
my hope is that's simple, easy too. So I don't know. The biggest thing for me is I'm excited for the query planner. With Mongo 2.6 on your local dev machine, you didn't get the query planner. But now that we ship with 3.2, as of Mongo 3, they added the query planner. And so when you do like an explain on one of your queries, you get the query planner output, which is pretty awesome. Like, it's big and complex, but it gives you a ton of information about how your query is being put together and executed and what indexes it's using and that kind of stuff. So I'm super, super excited about that.
yeah, yeah. Oh, one thing to note though. So with 1.5 on the horizon, that's going to be dedicated to Apollo
Mm-hmm.
and making that integration as smooth as possible. So that's
Yes.
what's next for Meteor 1.5.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what happens, and I hope we don't get, like, the biggest question to me is, what does authentication look like in 1.5?
Yeah,
And with Apollo, and I hope it's not some lame answer like, just run Mongo separately outside of Apollo and everything will be fine.
yeah,
Because that would be terrible. So I hope they do something a little better than that. And I know they've got Ben on it, and he's a smart guy. So
yeah. He'll get it done.
hopefully he does something good there.
Cool.
Yeah. So just 14. I found this interesting. They added React tree snapshot testing. And so I hadn't actually, like, I've heard of snapshot testing, but not quite in this way. Like, I've heard of taking an actual screenshot and
Yeah,
comparing and diffing the two. But this actually will take a React component, and you can take a snapshot of it using this React test renderer, and then you can use Jest to kind of compare them, and it will basically spit out a snapshot file. This looks really, really interesting.
yeah,
Their example is like just creating a link that links to Facebook, and it's just got this snapshot file that shows an actual link with a class name, href, on mouse enter, on mouse leave, and some text. And, like, they can then do a comparison of that with, the next time they run the test, and
yeah,
they change the link to point to Messenger and change the word to Messenger, and, like, it fails the test and shows you the diff. And that's kind of interesting, because I think you can basically run your test and say, this is what I expect things to look like, right? I'm at a known good point. And then next time you run the test, if someone borked that and you feel that that's an error, like, it'll throw an error in the test, and someone will take a look at it and hopefully try to figure out, like, why there's a difference here.
yeah. I'm
And
glad they're investing more in Jest.
huh?
Awesome. I'm glad they're investing more in Jest. for a while people didn't like Jest because it was super slow. That's because they use Jasmine, and like it's just really slow for their tests to run. I wonder how fast these snapshot tests run. Because if they're super slow, that's a buzzkill.
Yeah.
That's why everyone likes Enzyme, but I like Jest just because it's like a homegrown tool that will always be supported, and has probably the most product know-how because like Ben Alpert is working on Jest. So.
Well, yeah, and that's the interesting thing, right? Like we couldn't have had this prior to React 15.3. If you look at the changelog notes there, they added a new React test render, which is what this is all completely based on, is the fact that it's rendering out this output now. So
yeah, I bet you they did this because Enzyme was getting a lot of like heat, like picking up pace. That Jest just needed some competitive advantage. Like Jest is pretty cool. I really liked it when I first used it. I like Enzyme too. They're both accomplishing the same thing in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But snapshot testing is amazing because people have an assumption of what their DOM looks like, even like outside of components, right? And you can make simple mistakes really easily that can now be actual tested, not just code. It's like actual elements, and you know what they are, and you know what the diff or the actual feature. So that's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah,
Makes UI testing a lot better.
I could see this being really interesting for like, especially with Crater, like pulling in versions of Telescope and like wanting to make sure that certain elements stay on the page for my Crater theme or something like that, like that could be interesting. They do say fast iteration speed. I'm kind of curious. We should play around with that and see if it's slow like you think.
Yeah, I hope it's fast.
Tell us about CSS and JavaScript and why it's terrible.
So, like CSS and JavaScript has blown up to be like the new tabs versus spaces debate. You got people on one side that are all about CSS, and they are against CSS and JavaScript completely. And you have the other side who's hardcore CSS and JavaScript and says that you can do everything in it. And then I'm in like this middle camp where you try to use CSS and JS as much as you can, and the things that you can't do in that, you rely on CSS. But there are really two camps just going at each other. If you look on Twitter, if you look on anything that Kent C. Dodds posts or Max Sieber posts about this, or even Jed Watson, these are all React people, you'll see that there's just huge tweet threads of just flame wars on why you should not use CSS and JavaScript, or why you should, or why CSS sucks. And so this post is just going through the frustration this guy named Jimmy had about his CSS and JS problems. And he was trying to do something very simple, like making a button and making button groups and toolbars and all that stuff, just like Bootstrap. And in CSS and JS, there's no such thing as descendant selectors. So it's really hard to make like tree-like CSS structures. And that's because CSS and JavaScript is actually component-based. It's similar to BEM, but you should be making components per style. And his argument is there are times where you need to have some type of parent selector to make styles happen on components and stuff like that. I totally get that, and you should just use CSS for that. Like I totally get it. But it doesn't mean you have to, just because you're using CSS and JavaScript doesn't mean you have to use it all the time. But there are camps that say that you can. So my recommendation, and this is where I'm coming from, like CSS and JavaScript is going to be the future of web development because CSS is not maintainable, right? The only person who can maintain a CSS code base is one person. The minute you add another person or another person, then any convention you have goes out the door. You can try to have linters, you can try to have CSS lint, and then the minute you add a pre-compiler in there, so like less or Sass, then the style goes out the door again, so, and then everyone has different opinions on less and Sass. Like literally there's different like document structure on how you do this class name. There are people who say you can only use IDs, which they're crazy. You can only use class names, no actual selectors on elements. So it's a huge it's a very opinionated a very opinionated landscape. So with CSS and JavaScript, it doesn't really matter. It's just based on the component itself. It's contained. It's self-contained. It's maintainable because it's JavaScript. You can extend and import and play around with it. You can actually run functions on that. Imagine taking a style and based on the status of some record, you change the style into something else, right? How do you do that? How do you do that in CSS today, right? You can't. There's no dynamic. Dynamic computation based on the server in CSS by itself, right? On the flip side, how do you do pseudo selectors? Well, some libraries have implemented that. How do you do hovers? How do you do media queries easily? So there's trade-offs on both sides. And this guy was just experiencing his problem. I think my recommendation is to use a library called Aphrodite. It doesn't make any style tag. It doesn't make like inline styles. It's not inline styles or anything. It just has a function that takes your style object and appends it to the style tag in the head, which is really cool. And it's really flexible, and you can actually extend it very well. So Aphrodite, it's made by the people at Khan Academy, and it's a great product. I would use it in any project that I have with React.
Nice. Yeah, I don't do a lot of styling, so I don't know if I have a lot to add here. I try to avoid that when I can.
Yeah, I mean, for good reason, Like, I hate CSS. I've always hated it. I just have always had to do it, And
honestly, like, this is the biggest pro mobile app argument I usually see is, like, CSS is terrible, and, like, testing design across all the different supported browsers is tough to get right. And like, even when you do think you have it all right, it turns out there's a bug. You fix it for one, it breaks another. Like, that's usually the argument you see in regards to like why mobile is better. And so, I think, I don't know, CSS modules are interesting to me. This smells like we need a Space Dojo show. I think we should definitely get Ramsey on, and maybe we can invite Jimmy on. I don't know, someone anti-CSS module.
Oh, just go on Twitter, you'll find them.
Huh? Go on Twitter.
Yeah, you'll find them there.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Well, I want to say thank you for listening, everyone. That's the end of today's show. We won't have a show, I guess, this week, technically. Because I'll be out of town on Friday. I'm going to be in Dallas. So if you're a listener and you hear this and you're in Dallas, let me know. We'll hang out. I don't know. Like, I appreciate everyone listening, and like, we only grow, like, we don't do any advertising. We only grow through people sharing the show. So if you watch it on YouTube, give it a thumbs up. If you see it on Twitter, give us a retweet, give us a tweet. If not, like, we appreciate that kind of stuff, and like appreciate growing the audience and having new listeners. So
definitely
super awesome and helpful, and big thanks to DigitalOcean. I think this is the last show they're sponsoring, and to Modulus as well for being sponsors. Super helpful. Check those guys out, digitalocean.com. If you use the code creator10, they use that to determine if our ad's effective. So if you're going to sign up, use the code creator10. I think you get a discount too if you use it. And we don't have a discount code for Modulus, but modulus.io. So, all right. I guess I'll see you in 2 weeks, Abby.
See you, man. Have a great time, and I'll see everyone else later.
Yep.
This video has been a Space Dojo production. You can click the Learn More button to find out more about us at spacedojo.com. Or you can click the subscribe button to get notified about new videos we put out each week. Thanks for watching.